There are a great many people today who are concerned about the feminine aspects of God. Rosemary Ruther, Merlin Stone, Carol Myers, just to name a few feminist theologians here, who have brought many good and wonderful things to the table of our modern scholarly debates. There's a recent publication out that has been making its inroads within the evangelical sectors of Christianity, and it's called The Twilight of the Gods, Polytheism in the Hebrew Bible by David Panchansky. And the book basically takes the posture that long ago, in the pre-biblical world of what we call the Canaanite religion and the writing of what we call the KRT text in Canaanite and Ugaritic, for those who have a scholarly bent to their particular orientation. And at any rate, the assumption goes that Yahweh, or Jehovah God, if that's what you call deity, had a marriage and was wedded to Asherah. And you say, wait a minute, stop. I want to get off right here, because doesn't the Hebrew Bible suggest that the Asherah poles in high places were not to be worshipped? Absolutely. And isn't it true that Asherah is in the mighty council in the book of 1 Kings in the Old Testament, responding to Yahweh? That is absolutely true as well. Well, how do we put this data together? Well, in the ancient world, nations had their gods, and they were called tyrannical gods, or territorial gods and goddesses in the Near East. Phyllis Tribble, Baldwin scholar at the Union Theological Seminary in New York, correctly pointed out that when you read the KRT text, and she cited various other scholars who are very conversant with the Ugarit and the Semitic deities, that they were always governed by a male deity, and the females were always subject to him. Kinsey and other Middle Eastern scholars bring this out over and over, and they dispute the claim held by many feminist scholars that there was a golden age when the mother goddess reigned supreme. And so the arguments go back and forth. In modern times, a few scholars are now starting to advance the notion that the Hebrew Bible redacted Asherah right out of the counsel of God, and therefore the Mrs. Yahweh, who Yahweh had been married to, was told to sit down and shut up. Well, what do we do with that type of redaction? It is true in ancient Egypt, in the Elephantine document, there was a Mrs. Yahweh. Number one, we do not know if that was Asherah. There's no reason to believe so. Then it gets cloudier yet when Yahweh in the Baal or Baal cycle, to use the English, Yahweh takes on the characteristics of Baal so he could marry Asherah. Some scholars dispute this and simply say that isn't a correct reading of the word Asherah in the Canaanite and Ugaritic tongue. So the controversy wages. Around and around she goes, and where it will stop, nobody knows. But one thing is for certain. Isaiah 43:10 and Isaiah chapter 44 has to deal with Yahweh having no consort, and within him is male and femaleness, especially through Shekinah glory, which of course is a counterpart to the Holy Spirit, which was expressed in early church worship in the Odes of Solomon. In the Odes of Solomon, the Holy Spirit, from the old Proverbs chapter 8 wisdom statements of the wisdom voice, was considered to be female in ancient Judah. And therefore, Yahweh always had a feminine nature to replicate womankind and a male nature to replicate mankind, or the male type within man and womankind, or anthropos, as the Greek would have it. It was just called Adam or Ish or man because Ish was taken out of the ground of red mud, and woman was taken out of man, then man was taken out of woman. In Hebrew, we called this a parallelism in the Genesis account. Rosemary Ruther and other scholars of the 1980s suggested, well, therefore we had to reverse the parallelism or the poetry account. But later scholars found out that woman was the actual crowning of creation because she came later in the intense third stage of the Hebrew poetry. So she is actually there at the zenith of creation. So she could be crowned in all of creation. Did you hear it? As we move down the informational highway about this discussion, it becomes very, very clear that in the early church, the Odes of Solomon represented a tripart nature of God, where there were the appearances of the Father, the Son, and the feminine manifestations of the Holy Spirit throughout the church. You say, but I flip open my King James Bible and the Greek word ekainos is masculine. Well, yes, but that's a masculine verbal train. Just like wisdom is feminine in the Old Testament, or just like the word shad, which we get the word El Shaddai, is also masculine. It is used to form a verbal train, not necessarily gender identity. Greek Beyond the Basics, a seminary publication, proves that well enough. But I know most of you out there aren't Greek scholars, and this, may or may not mean a lot to you. So if you know a little German, if you know a little Spanish or French or Italian, or any of the Romance language, this will indeed resonate with your thinking. That there are verbal trains that are established, and some languages do not even have a neuter, so it forces you to translate neuter objects with a masculine or feminine case ending. Now in Greek we do have a neuter. In Hebrew it's seen as a combination of masculine and feminine. type of endings to show the completeness of the one image that is being discussed there. For example, you have figurative language in the Old Testament that Israel was an Ezra Kenegdo for God. That's the Hebrew for wife. For Eve in the Garden of Eden to Adam. And yet, why is Israel called the wife of God? Because there was a marriage. Read Hosea, the 3rd and 4th chapter. And you come away with that one where Israel was put away for her adulterous and idolatrous behavior. And so, what happened is she was unfaithful to her lover. So yes, there is a feminine role for God's nature in the Christian church. But we've got to be very careful how we establish that. Some have attempted it through Mary and the co-redemptrix Mary cult that takes place in some of the Roman Catholic modes of thought. But even when you push them far enough, they will not say that Mary is equal to Jesus. And there are 5 Latin words meaning to honor and to lift up. But it's the word co-redemptrix that causes the problem there. Co is generally thought as being equal or co-eternal or co-regent or co-connected. But they try to argue that co in this case does not show an equilibrium. But back to Asherah. There is no reason to believe that Asherah was taken out of the biblical text. It is certainly true that for most of Israelite history, they were polytheistic. Don't read the Bible through rose-colored glasses. Heschel and other scholars, Bernard Lang, to quote another, will point out that the prophetic report of monotheism was not a late development. It began on the Arabian Peninsula, where worship to one God, just like it was in ancient Egypt under Amenhotep, where they believed there was one God above all the others who was to be worshipped. How far back does monotheism go? A lot further than these scholars are trying to maintain, where it was only redacted into the biblical text in the post-exilic period. Just because Israel was polytheistic for most of her history, no way does violence to the biblical prophets, writes Heschel, who stood in complete uniformity on the idea of one God, and he alone should you worship. And Yahweh had no consort. He didn't need one. And therefore, with the feminine spirit and the Ruach HaKodesh being feminine in Hebrew for the Holy Spirit, he simply didn't need to go into such a contract. I urge you, as beloved saints of God, to be careful of the information that you swallow, no matter who it comes from, no matter the level of his or her education. Even challenge what you hear on this broadcast from Father Tom. Just be fair in how you evaluate the evidence. All I care about is I can help you to move Godward, and all I care about is that you be fair in your analysis and believe that there is truth out there in this postmodern age to be found. This is Father Tom Roberts saying, thanks for listening.